think I would start perhaps by first of all welcoming all of you to this parallel session on measuring progress, green growth indicators. If you look at the program, you will see the name of the moderator is Ben Simmons. And if you look at me, I'm nowhere close or resemble any name that is Ben Simmons. So that's the moderator, and I don't look like him. I haven't done any plastic surgery since I came, even though this country is very well known in this scientific field. So my name is Shen Fulai. I am working for the United Nations Environment Program, and Ben has been my colleague, but unfortunately after he arrived in Seoul, he has not been very well. He's staying in this hotel, but he has been sick and he has not been able to come to this session to do the moderation. So I have been gloriously asked to step in to help facilitate this session. Now, this session, as you see, is on the issue of measurement, and this work we are going to discuss is in the context of GGKP, Green Growth Knowledge Platform. As some of you might know, the GGKP is a joint adventure initiated by the World Bank and together with other members of the international community, and that is United Nations Environment Program, OECD, and the GGGI, the host of this summit. It was established in early 2012 in Mexico, and since then we have identified several major areas for filling the knowledge gap. One of the major areas for research is the area of measurement indicators. How do we measure green growth, green economy progress? And after Rio Plus 20, the 4 partner organizations decided to do a joint paper on measuring green economy, green growth. And of course, these 4 agencies, we all approach the issue of measurement from our respective perspectives. For example, OECD is one of the forerunners in developing green growth indicators, very systematic and having several major categories. And the World Bank also has been focusing very much on the measurement of comprehensive capital, natural wealth, as well as the valuation of ecosystem and services and so on. Now for GGGI and for UNEP, our focus seems to be similar, that is to focus on the use of indicators in formulating, in supporting green economy policy making, green economy decision making. So the 4 agencies have joined forces, and luckily we managed to produce a joint report that was launched in April during the 2nd annual conference of the GGKP. And some of you might have seen copies, hard copies of the report upstairs at the GGKP stand. And I have one copy here. This is how it looks like. This is a joint piece of work done by the experts of the 4 agencies. And it tries to present tries to converge on an integrated framework where the different strengths of the partner organizations are put together to give a total picture of how, for example, the wealth accounting comes into the framework, how the OECD major categories of indicators can be located in this broad framework, and how the emphasis by GGGI and the UNEP on the use of indicators can be reflected in this framework. So today we are very fortunate to have one of the main authors of the report, Ziga from the OECD, to give us a main presentation, to give us a gist of this joint work, of course, plus some of the work from OECD as well, because that's where he comes from. In addition, we also are fortunate to have two discussants. One is from Indonesia, Ibu Enda, from the Ministry of Planning. And we also have our expert from the UN Office for Sustainable Development, Dr. Kang Sang-in, or Sang-in Khan, who is a long who has been working on related issues for a long time. He is not only an expert in the area of indicators and the modeling and the quantitative assessment, he's also very much an expert on the overall green economy, green growth discussion. So without further ado, let me invite our main presenter to give us a short presentation, about 15 minutes, describing the collective work, and then followed by the interventions by the two discussants, and then we will open up the discussions from the floor. Okay? Now, the floor is yours, Vika.
Okay. Thank you, Fulai. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, and my colleagues, let me first thank the hosts for a well-organized summit that, what to my knowledge, brings really the key elements of green growth together. And I'm very pleased to be in Korea today, because Korea has been very inspiring to me, because it has demonstrated that green and growth can really work together well. And also I'm proud to say that Korea has been one of the first countries to use green growth indicators in their economic policy context. And I hope they will continue to do so. And also, just let me say that with Korea's support, we have joined forces with GGGI, the World Bank and UNEP to launch the Green Growth Knowledge Platform as mentioned by Fulai. And what I would like to say that there is great demand for what we are trying to achieve here. And this has been witnessed by an expanding network of our partners. And within this platform, we have now prepared a scoping paper that will help us establish a common basis for green growth metrics. And today, I would like to discuss why this is an outstanding achievement of our international efforts. And this matters for a cost-effective decision-making process. So there are actually three thoughts I would like you to take with you today. So first of all, what is to be measured and how? Second, what are the key benefits of using green growth indicators in countries? And third, what are the next steps or the knowledge gaps upon which we have to advance to improve our green growth measurement framework? So let me first, very briefly, just demonstrate what OECD brings to this process. And it dates back to 2009, where we were actually asked to develop a green growth strategy by the ministers. And why I'm mentioning here this today is because many of you have this challenge, because this has led, on our side, to the most comprehensive work stream that we have experienced so far. And it included 25 OECD committees span across different policy areas, including economy, finance, environment, and the development. And this is very important because we had to pull together all the experience with evidence-based analysis and how to integrate environmental policy and economic considerations to deliver two main outputs, which are presented here. So one is the green growth strategy, and the second one is the green growth indicators report. And since then, we have been mainstreaming green growth across all policy areas of work at the OECD. And the OECD Economic Survey of Korea 2012 is a very good example how one can integrate environmental considerations into structural and economic policy context. And we have also included green growth in investment policy reviews and addressed also some of the sectorial issues. For example, in one of our studies on green growth in energy sector. And there have been different attempts to use the green growth in the policy context across the countries. And these reports summarize these attempts. And I'm very proud to say that last week we have finally put green growth at the heart of the development. And saying that, I would like to say that we are strongly committed to keep on delivering on green growth and contributing to the green growth knowledge platform in this regard. So it is very important we have international cooperation here to get right the concepts that we would like to measure. So let me just briefly explain this. As Folai mentioned, 4 international organizations represent the 4 very solid pillars of the green growth knowledge platforms. Even though these pillars or our organizations have slightly different approaches, we have now finally managed to pull together the understanding or our experience and start to converge on what green growth or green economy really means. So to put it simply, green growth is really about efficiently using natural resources to foster economic growth without compromising our well-being. And saying that, it's really about minimizing pollution, strengthening the resilience of our economic and environmental systems, and very importantly, taking into consideration social aspects and economic context of countries where we want to pursue green growth strategies. And this has formed a very strong basis for our next step, which is to go towards a common measurement framework for green growth. So let me briefly now give you the technical backbone of the whole process. So I will try to be very simple here. So just imagine we start from the basis of the current comprehensive wealth. Comprehensive because it does not include only the production capital, the produced capital, or human or social capital, but importantly the natural capital that provides environmental services and natural assets which are key inputs into the production of the outputs. And this comprises not only the material and non-material, but also non-material well-being aspects, and touches upon the environmental dimension of quality of life. And the key question here is, how efficiently can we use these inputs in the production framework to deliver these outputs? And this is covered by the theme of environmental and resource productivity. And this is very important because if you see it from the context of preserving the wealth for future generation, we need to understand that this complicated picture is all about transiting from where we are today on our long-term growth towards where we want to be in the future. And where we want to be in the future means that we want to secure a non-compromised well-being for our people. Different agents are inside of this story, and they're driven by the incentives of policies. And so we have to, with another theme of indicators, we also have to take this into consideration. And also there will be opportunities arising from it, both on the economic and social sides. And importantly, the underlying ground for all this is the socio-economic context within which everything what we do here has to be interpreted. So let me very briefly go over the key themes of indicators that we agreed upon in this paper. So first of all, the question is, are we using sustainably natural resources not to engage into any kind of dangerous downside risks to economic growth? So this is captured by the theme of natural assets that broadly follows the classification proposed by the SEA Central Framework. So it includes indicators of aquatic and forest resources, minerals and energy, land and soil resources, water resources, and biodiversity. Next, the question is our growth becoming any greener? So here we're really talking about the environmental and resource productivity. And the indicators that we consider here are indicators of innovation, energy productivity, material productivity, carbon productivity, water productivity, and waste is an important component. Now, at the center of this picture, as you can see it here, is in the center of the slide, is really what people gain out of this. So we have to capture that through the topic of environmental life quality and safety. And this includes indicators of health, risks, water and ecosystem services. Importantly, we always have to question ourselves, is the policy mix that we are pursuing the right one? Does it provide sufficiently the incentives for the agents to behave more responsibly in terms of preserving natural resources, for example? And also the key question is, what is in for businesses? What is in for us in terms of jobs? And this has to be captured with the theme of policies and opportunities. We have indicators of employment, policy instruments, and on international cooperation. And finally, the ultimate question is wealth being preserved or not? And this is captured by the comprehensive wealth accounts, including adjusted net savings and adjusted net income. And as I said, socioeconomic context must never be forgotten here. And only then, green growth indicators become really a powerful tool that can support decisions with facts and can make our policies work better. So let me give you a few examples, just to get a taste of what we are talking about here. So for the natural stocks, fish stocks are one area that is really important to look into. So they're the assets that are in constant need of surveillance, because if they fail to renew themselves, then we will run the critical tipping points. But now the question here is that imposes quite some challenges that can stimulate further researches. So what is really the current state of stocks? And where are the tipping points that we must not cross? Then the next, on environmental resource productivity, for example, let's look at the carbon productivity measure. And as you can see here, there has been some decoupling, both in relative and absolute terms, of CO2 activity from economic growth. But to complete this picture, one has to take into consideration also the demand side of the story. And importantly, the demand-based CO2 emissions, or so-called the CO2 footprint approach, is really about the CO2 that is embedded in final domestic demand while accounting for international trade flows. And when we take this into consideration, we see that there might have been some cross-border shifts of environmental effects. So next, exposure to air pollution by small particles is a very important indicator of environmental quality of life. But here, there are also many challenges to be addressed. And one thing that makes very difficult this indicator to interpret comes with the measurement and data issues. So one thing is that we are not really sure where are the thresholds beyond which the human health is irrevocably damaged, and also there is still more room for progress to gather well the spatial data and really to continuously collect the data over time. The next, given that most countries nowadays face budgetary considerations, an indicator of environmental related tax revenues is an appropriate one to consider here. So the issues here are not really only with the scale, but also with the tax structure and the tax base. As you can see here, this is a simple example, but it clearly shows that countries consider this taxation in the range of 1 to 3% of GDP. But importantly, most of it is related to energy. And also, many of these countries have in place some tax exemption that undermine the effectiveness of this measure. And this is what indicator is able to show us. So indicators really can provide us good clues about whether the policy incentives are the right ones or not. Let me just demonstrate with a very small example on that. You all know that renewable subsidies has been expanded globally. And current IEA estimate is that there are around $88 billion subsidies per year. Now, when we relate this picture to incentives against greener growth, because many governmental policies still rely a lot on fossil fuel resources, we can see that pulling together the data at the global scale, we're talking about $600 billion of fossil fuel subsidies. So now the question really is this the right policy signal? So one benefit of the indicator is to hold the mirror in front of what we are doing. So let's see a little bit more the experience from relocation of countries, what are the other benefits. And this will help to steer further discussion on how to implement better the indicators and to support the policy need where it has to be done. So indicators to use is very important first because we get feedback whether they're relevant for policy or not at all. Then it helps us to exchange experience and also good practices on how to use them, how to improve them. And it's very important in our process to further develop the indicator set. So the indicators have been used by several countries. Several OECD countries have used them, but importantly, they have been used in non-OECD countries as well, in the LAC region, in Eastern European, Caucasus and Central Asia region, and also in East Asia. And this is also where we want to take further action. And I would really like to invite you afterwards to share your experience on this, whether you have seen indicators or any similar approaches being used in your countries as well. What have we learned from all this? So what are the key challenges that have been emphasized in the GGKP scoping paper? So I will here touch upon just on some of the key issues and how we can address them. So first of all, it's very important to harmonize the concepts along the SEA guidelines. As you know, the SEA central framework has been adopted last year. It's a international statistical standard, but to be really effective, it has to be soon populated with the data. And importantly here is not only to achieve the high comparability of indicators across countries, but really also to sustain the monitoring over time on a comparable basis. Next, there is a big scope within the GGKP to fill further the knowledge gaps, particularly on valuation of natural resources, but also on developing further demand-side indicators, as I demonstrated before. Now, I would like to share a piece of very useful experience that we had in the LAC project. So what we've done here is we've given the questionnaire to the authorities, and they assessed each indicator with respect to the 3 key criteria, whether it's relevant for the policy, whether it's sound from an analytical point of view, and third, where are the measurement and data gaps. And this has helped us to understand where the capacity needs are. So it's important to bear in mind that we have to think ahead and collect data now with standardized approaches that will allow us to really sustain the continuous supply of data over time. And this has to be done with good collection techniques. And we have to keep building experience with application in countries, and also not to be afraid to test the new grounds with pilot studies. And all this will then help us to make progress with measuring. The next, what countries have said that they found useful in applying the indicators, the ones that have used them so far. So clearly one was to raise the awareness of the issues at stake. Second was to strengthen their capacity to monitor progress. Third, to really holistically assess the environmental impacts across the economy. Then, to understand better the origins of impacts and potential risks to growth and social development. And then also to establish a comparable reporting that is impact by impact for each factor that matters for sustainable development. And this can help to improve the evidence-based decision-making process and also ultimately make some progress towards green growth. So, slowly to conclude, I would just like to highlight where the key gaps lay. And this I would really like then your participation from the floor to discuss some of them. They are more detailedly described in the GGKP scoping paper, which I invite you to read in its entirety. So, first of all, it's really important that we keep on converging on headline indicators, a small set of indicators that can capture core elements of green growth and that speak to policymakers, to businesses, but also to the civil society. The civil society understands what is in for them, and also that they can build the trust in government policies. So we come up with the proposed set of 6+1 indicators. So in the theme of environmental resource productivity, we have highlighted CO2 productivity, non-energy material productivity, multi-factor productivity, including environmental services. Then in the natural asset-based theme, we have highlighted the index of natural resource use, changes in land use and cover. For environmental quality of life, the index, the indicator of air pollution. And then we have, for opportunities and policy responses, one placeholder for countries to choose depending on their own context. And this has to be brought into the larger picture as well. So let's think about the wealth accounting. As I mentioned, we have different forms of capital, and there are key inputs into the long-term growth, and we need to make this long-term growth sustainable to achieve prosperity and well-being. In other words, wealth is really key to sustain our future consumption. So let me slowly conclude. This is my last slide. And I would like to call here for also further cooperation within the GGKP. So what OECD is doing currently is we are developing the green multi-factor productivity measure, which really takes natural resources as input factors and selected pollutants as undesirable outputs in the production function. Next, we are also developing and computing the index of natural resource use. Both these measures are now being tested for both OECD and non-OECD countries. And really to conclude here, we need to strengthen international efforts to keep working on the global green growth indicator database. OECD has done some progress on this, but only for the OECD countries and selected partner countries like Brazil, Russian Federation, India, Indonesia, China, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, and Argentina. But more work is needed here, and this is also where your help will be needed. Then I would like to thank you here, and I would just like to remind you of the date, because we are organizing a related conference at the end of this year in December, and we really focus on the policy options and case studies to tap on public funds to encourage private investment into greening infrastructure. I would like to thank you for your kind attention here and open the floor for the discussion.
Thank you, Ziga, for your presentation. Obviously, OECD has done a tremendous amount of work in the area of indicators, as we have seen in the presentation, and also OECD has been a major contributor to the collective work of the GGKP on the conversion of the approaches from the GGKP partner organizations. The fundamental framework that was introduced in the earlier part of the presentation has to do with this so-called production function that starts with different kinds of capital in going through the production processes and then ending up with a wide set of wealth, different forms of wealth, right? So that is the essential framework. And of course, you have the policy context, you have the policy social context, you have the economic opportunities connected to it. But the essential framework is going from capital base through production process, ending with the strengthening of wealth in a broad sense, which will be the foundation for production in the next round. So that is the major framework. And of course, as to the some of the headline indicators, these are at the moment these are just proposed largely from OECD, and these headline indicators have yet to be further discussed. Not only within GGKP partners, but also open for also wider discussion with partners. So thanks again, Ziga, for your very comprehensive presentation. And now let me invite our discussants. Maybe first of all, Ibu Anda from Indonesia, maybe to give us your first reaction coming from the government planners' point of view, how a framework like that, how that kind of framework is likely to support government development planning, policy making in relation to green growth, green economy, whether that kind of framework helps, or whether there are still gaps, or whether there are things that may not be so clear or obvious to an average policymakers, for example, in the planning department. So let me invite Iwan, maybe give us a reaction from the country economic planner's perspective. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation, and I've read briefly the books. That I think it's a very, very systematically put, and will provide guidance for a country to implement. But I think in order to country to implement, we really have to be very careful, because even the way country approaching in implementing green growth and green development is very different. It's very contextual. You know, we see examples from Korea, for example, which is very top-down, and just the big discussion this morning, you know, the small at community level also are able and potential to have a green growth. So it really depends on how the green activities, or what kind of activities in the area that can be green. There are top-downs, there are bottom-up. For Indonesia, for example, we do already have the environmental law since 1972. But again, putting indicators on our standard, and then getting the pollution data from various level of activities is still very challenging. We do have a system in the Ministry of Environment, but systematically, if I said systematically, because we do have a good example on the MDG indicators, for example. MDG indicators is more tangible than in the area of ecosystem and environment, but still a long process in getting and giving knowledge to everybody in the sector what the indicators for education is, what indicators in health, in income, and all, in poverty. Those kind of tangible indicators are still very difficult. And Indonesia tried to using MDG and localize them. Localize means because activities are local context. So these are the guidance that and also suggested indicators that will be probably aggregated later on, because there is an effort from OECD to really collect from countries. Should be also putting a local context. So yes, there is a guidance on that, but capacity to really implement it so that it's suitable with every country situation. Especially green growth, green economy is probably still very young, and people can interpret it freely. So that one. How then this indicators it relates to the existing activities in every country. So and then we can sort of create local indicators that also conform with the global later on. So then some institution can really aggregate it like the MDG. Second, of course, it's not just the capacity in the sector, because programs should produce this kind of data to produce this kind of indicators. Second is also that later on there also have to be a systematic way in a country to collect. In Indonesia, the example would be there is a statistical agency to do that. There is a survey for social, survey for economic, survey for poverty. And in this case, Indonesia is also in the process of developing survey for environment. And so that will be the systematic way to really collect the data so that we can produce the indicators. So it's a long way to go there, because to get also the good data collection and also the valid information collected contained in the data also need a critical mass in the activities. Because if it is not, then it's not really representing what is going on in there. And lastly, I think on this first question is that Indonesia is very decentralized, as I mentioned. That Indonesia now have 33 provinces, 430 districts, and have its own direct election. And so we really not just to have from the central government putting it on the ground or the practitioner, but it's also the local government is in the picture. And so how we also put capacity in the local government to promote this green growth and green activities will also really key, and also asking them to maintain the data collection system. So I think for the first round, I'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Enda, for sharing your perspectives from the Indonesian economic planning department's point of view. I think you have emphasized very much the importance of making the work of indicators context specific, because each country may approach green economy, green growth differently. You have also emphasized the importance of capacity building to be able to implement the work on measurement, not only at the central level, but also at the local level, given the decentralized situation in Indonesia. And you also have emphasized the importance to do this work systematically and having a critical mass of expertise to do this work. So thank you very much, Ibu Enda, for this first round of intervention. Next, let me turn to Dr. Khan. I know you are very much into the theoretical side of things, and I would really like you, from a theoretical point of view, giving your perspective on the overall construct that you have seen, in terms of the framework that has been developed in this scoping paper, the way that I described earlier, right? Going from different kinds of capital into production and then ending with wealth. Maybe a more pointed question to you is whether the purpose of production is only to build up future wealth, or whether current consumption also has a place, for example. That's a more particular question, but you may wish to comment on the overall framework. Thanks.
Big challenge for me this afternoon. And the background materials is so comprehensive that I don't know how to organize my comment on the content of the presentation. But the moderator provided some basic questions, key questions, and I will focus on those questions. And my comment is not necessarily reflect the official views of the UNOSD. I'm here as my personal quality of researchers. And I begin with the question 2 on the knowledge gaps in developing and identifying and also implementing the indicators. The program book says that we cannot manage what we cannot measure. But here, I like to say that we cannot measure what we cannot define. We don't define. So definition is very important at the beginning point. And I took 2 definitions, one for green economy and the other for green growth. In 2008, UNEP Economics and Trade Branch introduced the basic concept of green economy. It's an economy that results in improved human well-being and reduce the inequalities of the long term while not exposing future generations. So it is a replication of the basic definition of sustainable development. So I can say that green economy is an equivalent to the sustainable development. But inside of the green growth, in 2009, the Ministerial Conference of the OECD says that the green growth is to promote economic growth and development while reducing pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, etc. So it touches mainly on the economic and environmental dimensions of the sustainable development. In this regard, I can say that green growth is a subset of the sustainable development, and also it is a part of the green economy as a whole. And But on in field, there are two types of green growth approaches. At the Korean perspectives in 2008, green growth seek to recast the traditional development paradigm, depending on the massive exploitation of the human and natural resources, because after 30 years rapid economic growth, at the end of 1990s, Korea suffered massively from the lack of growth momentum and also the heavy dependency of the imported fossil fuels. It raised some issues on the energy security, and also Korea suffered much from the accelerated local climate change. So at that time, we needed to find a new growth momentum or the new national development paradigm. So it represents national initiatives to promote and sustain the development path. And internationally, so as I said, green growth is a new slogan or the motto to promote and to implement the sustainable development concept in practice. So sometimes I feel that there are still much confusions on the basic concept of the green economy and green growth or sustainable development, but I think that there is nothing new under the sun. The three concepts are all correlated, and it says the same content, in fact. And on the question 3, the national experience on the development of the green growth indicators, I'd like to say a case of Korean low-carbon green growth indicators. As you may know, that the Korean low-carbon green growth strategy is focusing on the 3 policy directions. The first one is to get the more climate change resilient socio-economic system. And the second policy direction is to find a new growth engine, new economic growth engine. And the third one is to improve the quality of life. So in some sense, in Korean perspectives, green growth means a little different interpretation of the sustainable development in implementing field. So in Korean case, indicators, Korea has 42 strategic indicators on green growth divided into 10 policy directions under the 3 objectives of low-carbon green growth strategy. And also Korea developed very detailed project-level indicators to evaluate the annual achievements of the 42 implementing project included in the 5-year plan of green growth between 2009 and 2013. So there are 194 project-level annual achievement indicators. So it is very comprehensive and complicated, but very strong hard work on the quantitative analysis on the measuring the progress toward green growth. And my observation on those indicator works, that indicators are closely related to the national strategy and development issues. And also some indicators represent as a result the priority of Korean perspectives is not easily globalized at the international context. So this is very special case. And also there is a lack of indicators on the social and ecological field, ecological dimension of inclusive green growth in a sense. So this is my comment on the question 3. And on question 4, how to move the work to date on indicators forward. Here I'd like to propose that the current work on monitoring progress on green growth or green economy need to be integrated into the works on the accounting system and modeling works, because the final objective of developing indicators is to measure and evaluate the policy impact in real life. So here I propose to work further on the indicators, integrated account, as mentioned by the system of economic and environmental account, and also some modeling works, including computable general equilibrium macroeconomic terms or some system dynamics. I noted here that I'd like to note here that Korean government and Ministry of Environment and the Korean Office for Statistics and also Bank of Korea have worked for the past 10 years to develop the Korean system of economic and environmental accounting. So we accumulated a little experience on those fields, and maybe we can share in your green growth knowledge partnership in future. And question one, on the question one, I think that Enda mentioned already the remaining challenges in implementing. I think that the most important challenge is to how to tailor the proposed indicators, accounting systems, and models in local context, national context, which is much different from one country to another. This is my first round of comment. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Khan, for your remarks, and clearly, I think you have pointed out there might still be issues over the concepts, but as you also have concluded, they all pretty much sound similar, so we can largely ignore conceptual difficulties, I think. In other words, not to dwell on the conceptual issues which can continue for another few decades, but at the same time, work needs to move on. And obviously, from the Korean experience, there has been a tremendous amount of work already gone into not only green growth, but also green growth indicators. As you have mentioned, some of the work has been going on for more than for about a decade, trying to capture some of those measurements. And obviously, you have a particular Korean focused set of indicators that you would like to focus on: climate resilient economy, new engine of growth, and the quality of life, and so on. And you have developed lots of indicators, to measure your national strategy. And I think we have also taken note of your point about the importance to link the indicators work to national strategy, to national green economy, green growth strategy. And this also implies the importance of localizing the work of indicators. And obviously what has been presented here is largely a proposed global framework. Now, how that global framework is going to be useful will depend on very much on the local context, and also that require maybe a lot of adaptations to suit the local policy making purposes. Yeah. So points are very taken. Now the floor is open for you to engage our main presenter as well as our discussants. So you can raise your questions, make your comments in relation to any of the points that you have heard so far from any three of them, or from me as well. Okay, so the floor is open. When you intervene, kindly introduce yourself, your affiliation, and also to try to be brief so that we can get more interventions from the floor. Thank you. Would you mind coming forward? Yeah, please. It's okay. And because I think there is a translator, there is an interpreter that needs the microphone.
Thank you very much. I am happy to speak to all doctors and officers, many agencies, and researchers, and scholarships also. Thank you very much. Yes, yes, thank you very much. I'm from Seoul, and I belong to Hangul University of Foreign Language as a graduate school student, and also I'm a CEO also of my own companies. Okay, I have I had have some problem and some questions of accounting system. I would like to ask Dr. Sang In Kang, how about your opinion now present accounting systems? I think we have two kinds of evaluation systems. And at the viewpoint of now present accounting system, after depreciations and but some machine and the company, some machine and some material, and but after depreciations also there remains some materials and machines and physical things. But until now, we are calculating the machines as a treasury, as not useful, as a useless things. After the appreciation. I don't understand this. I think, but as you know, Einstein physical laws, our energy and our material is eternal, not disappeared. But I think it's our global green growth means global is, as you know, the global category and the framework, its meaning, and the green is our purpose to more good life and more good earth. And I think as growth is a category is kind of economic, but I think it's it has some contradicted some problems. But I wish to hear about your opinions about this accounting systems and now present accounting depreciations issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think my understanding is the issue is that in the current accounting system, you depreciate your capital stock, and then of course, as the capital stock is depreciated, physical capital stock is depreciated, then it's useless, right? It's off the book and so on. But from a materials point of view, materials matters they never disappear, right? So they are eternal. That's why I heard the word eternal. So how do we reconcile the existing accounting system, which depreciates materials and capital and so on, while at the same time, in the context of green growth, we really have to consider no materials to be completely, useless or fully disappeared or off the book. So I will leave that very challenging question to Dr. Khan to contemplate your response in the meantime while collecting further interventions. Okay? Thank you for the question, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
I have a question for Dr. Zanik.
Yes,
I'm Xiaoli Tang from GGGI. I understand that GGGI is a partnership of the GGKP in developing the green growth indicator. But right now, I didn't have a chance to review the OECD indicator yet. I mean, the indicator developed after the Paris workshop in April this year. But we had developed an internal GGGI green growth indicator that's showing I mean, I think I believe that that indicator based on the Paris workshop is developed after the Paris workshop. That indicator is a high-level guidance. My understanding is that high-level guidance is international, probably it's trying to build an international benchmark for green growth for all the countries. But I'm now working with Ibu Anda, with partners in Indonesia for the Green Growth Country Program. And I fully agree with Ibu Anda. For green growth implementation, that guidance, that high-level indicator probably can only provide guidance. So my question is, what's the next step? Do you have any plan to develop sector indicators, especially considering the developing country like Mongolia and Indonesia? They definitely have different visions for green growth, and they need different indicators to guide their planning process. So that's basically my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. For your question, I think after the publication of the scoping paper, I think the partners we have yet to, I guess, really get together to think about what's next. How do we build on this initial, very broad framework sort of scoping paper, and then move to the next level. So I think this has yet to happen. But in the meantime, I understand that GGGI does have its own work on indicators, and the World Bank also has its work on wealth accounting moving forward. And same thing for OECD, further country implementation, experimentation. As for UNEP, we are actually, you talk about sectoral indicators. So we do plan to, at the moment in UNEP, we have drafted a guidance manual also at the broad level, but really looking into how indicators are used in the different stages of policymaking process. How do we use indicators to identify issues? How do we use indicators to set targets? How do we use indicators to look at the policy interventions or measure policy interventions? How do we use indicators to evaluate the potential policy impacts, or to assess policy impacts ex ante? And then how do we monitor, evaluate policy performance ex post? So we are implementing this work, but the next piece of work we are doing in UNEP is to provide exactly the sectoral level indicators, guidance, transport, green buildings, water, agriculture, waste management, and so on. This is still being planned. So the point I'm trying to make is that different GGKP partners, we do have our particular emphasis, our particular streams of work, but it also means that we need to consider again how do we converge again as we decide on the next move. So this is my point, and of course I will ask other GGKP partners, maybe if they want to intervene, they also will have an opportunity here, right? And so let me now also, I think there was another gentleman who came to the front. Yeah, please. Thanks.
My name is David Kelleher. I'm with Hosei University here in Korea. And actually my... Yeah, I think so. My name is David Kelleher, Professor of Public Administration at Hosei University here in Korea. And to follow on with what you were just saying, it does seem that although this is a collaborative effort, some of the different institutions, including OECD, 3GI, are still, their imprint is still nevertheless seen in this effort. And as far as the development of government indicators, policy indicators, it mentions in the, which I've just looked at briefly, for environmental policies, for the OECD, we have very detailed policy indicators that can be developed about deposit refund systems and so on. For non-OECD countries, that's not going to be available. So what kind of policy indicators can we develop that we can we can use that will be, we can have data for non-OECD countries, as somebody who will perhaps look at that data later. And similarly, some of the data that I have looked at in the past has to do with EPI, Environmental Performance Index, and I was wondering if you're planning on doing something comparable to that in the future.
Thank you. I will deposit that question with Ziga, and if you don't mind, and including the question on there are two sets of questions, right? One is the policy indicators for non-OECD, and then the other one is whether there is a plan to do something similar to EPI. Okay, let's invite further interventions. Yes, Johan, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Joo-Hearn Kim, working for 3GI. My question is going to Ziga and Fulai. From your overall architecture, from the point of overall architecture on establishing green growth indicators, I would like to ask, do you have any plan or any idea to embrace corporate sectors, corporations to the platform on making green growth indicators? Because I would say approximately 2/3 of our economy is corporations accounts for 2/3 of our global economy, and then we clearly know that significant, corporations has significant amount of economic externality, so-called environmental externalities, and some corporation is voluntarily doing some job on environmental profit and loss account. So I would like to ask, any UNEP or GGGI or our OECD has some idea to embrace corporation as a producer of green growth indicators? Thanks.
Thanks, Johan. I think that's a very good question, and also deposited with Ziga. But also, I would like to maybe invite my colleague from the World Bank to think, if you want to. We have Michael from the bank sitting next to you, because I understand that from the bank side there is this WAVES initiative. WAVES stands for Wealth Accounting and Evaluation for Ecosystem Services, and within that, I think they do have the attempt to engage the business sector to account for natural capital and stuff like that. So maybe at a later point or now, Michael would like to intervene. Yeah, maybe Michael now. Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Michael Chaikin. I work in the World Bank Sustainable Development Network, which contributed in part to this joint publication, but also the center of activity within the bank for a lot of our work related to wealth accounting and the valuation of ecosystem services, which Fulai just mentioned. I was still trying to organize my thoughts as he beckoned me to the microphone, so I apologize if this is a bit all over the place, but I'll try and pick up on a few of the things that have been said. I think to the gentleman who observed that the imprint of the participating institutions is still very evident in this work, I think you're absolutely right, and that's symptomatic of the fact that this is really just a first attempt for these four institutions to come together and converge around that is quite complicated work that all of our institutions have quite a long history of and are approaching from very different angles. So to me, that's not a bad thing at this stage. It's just evidence of where we are in the process. And to get to this issue of what's coming next, I think one of the reasons why we have sort of waited on the conversation to define specific work program collectively since the release of this paper in April was to exactly take advantage of these types of opportunities to solicit feedback, not only from partner countries and other institutions in the UN family and elsewhere, but participants in fora like this, like a practitioners workshop that Ibu Enda and her government hosted us for last week in Jakarta, where we had about 100 government officials and researchers from around East Asia and South Asia for a couple of days, and there was huge interest in this topic, and it was very clear that there's a lot of work left to be done. Specifically on sort of what's coming next on the bank side, as Fulai mentioned, we do have this large program called WAVES, Wealth Accounting and Valuation of Ecosystem Services. And one of the big shortcomings of that set of methodologies so far, as well as the methods that underpin our wealth accounting work more generally, and these measures like adjusted net savings and genuine savings, which may be things you've heard of, are that they don't capture the full biophysical impacts of certain types of economic activity. So they don't incorporate the effects of the economy and human activity on certain types of natural systems. So the bank is really working hard with partners to try and round out and make these indicators much more comprehensive so that they really do indicate the biophysical impact and can be much more useful proxy for the environmental impact of different types of activity. I actually also wanted to ask a couple of questions to our panelists in this context, just to reflect some of the issues we're still struggling with at the bank, and which I think we collectively, or institutions and governments on their own, may be helpful to us in our own thinking. One is related to what Ibuenda said about the importance of contextualizing measurement and indicators, and you also mentioned the difficulty of localizing measurement for the MDGs. And I think right now the international community is quite caught up in a new discussion about the post-2015 framework, and we're going to go through that same struggle of, once we establish a new framework with a set of development goals, be they SDGs or new MDGs or some combination of the two, how do we come to an agreement around goals that are comparable across countries but also relevant within countries? I think there's a balance that needs to be struck there, and it's not obvious to us at the bank what the right balance there is. So I'd be interested in your and maybe others' perspectives, looking back on the MDGs experience. You know, to what extent was comparability to your neighbor countries, to other countries with similar stages of development and size of economy and other things useful as you and others tried to pursue the development goals? So that's one question. And then to Giga, I think sort of the elephant in the room, or one of them with this joint work, is we talk a lot about the national level resource productivity and TFP, but we don't really talk a lot about system limits in the natural asset base and the constraints to substitutability between natural assets and other forms of capital. And this is relevant both in very localized environmental systems, but also certainly in the context of the discussion around planetary systems and boundaries. Climate change is just one example. So I'm curious, since the OECD seems to be kind of the leader among our four institutions, at least in the maturity of thinking on these indicator issues, where you guys are in terms of trying to kind of square that circle, because I think for the adjusted net savings work we're doing at the bank, we're also struggling with that. It's a really nice way to capture the total wealth in a country, but there's sort of this implicit assumption that we can forever substitute the natural assets away and use them to invest in other forms of capital, when, of course, we all know that's not really true, and methodologically we're just not there yet to reflect that issue. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael, for bringing up these points. And certainly the issue of thresholds is really fundamental, and we have not really been able to grab that in our measurement framework. I mean, it's not that we are not aware of the importance of the issue. It's the question of whether we have sufficient information on those thresholds across large areas of not only the environmental spheres, but maybe in the social spheres as well. Because in the social sphere, there are also issues of thresholds in terms of inequality, for example. So very important point, and I think I would invite our panelists, our speaker, and also the discussants to think about these issues, and if you like, you may also want to comment on in the final wrap up. Let me invite a couple of more interventions from the floor, and then we will invite our speakers to respond. Okay. Yes, Jürgen.
So I'm Jørgen Randers from the Norwegian Business School. I think it is terribly important to distinguish much more clearly between green growth which is a process of economic development, and green economy, which is the state of affairs at a certain point in time. Green growth, as I said in my intervention earlier today, is an attempt at increasing the value added. You know, it's to increase the economic output, the output production within a year, while at the same time, ideally decreasing the ecological footprint, or at least increasing it less than if you chose the traditional solution. So this is a delta ecological footprint divided by the delta GDP, which should be lower than the delta ecological footprint over the delta GDP traditional solution. Green economy is something completely different. This is the question of thresholds. This is the question whether the total ecological footprint of the current situation is below the sustainable carrying capacity of the system or above. And I think in the continuation of this work, instead of using the GG/GE, you know, which confuses two totally different things, a process and a situation, one should distinguish the two. And then it is, of course, fairly simple to make the first approximation on the green economy side, because Mattis Wackernagel and the Global Footprint Network people have spent 15 years at least trying to make a state indicator, you know, a measure of the ecological footprint of a certain society, a certain corporation, a certain city, which can be compared at a quantitative level with the carrying capacity of this nation or that city or the hinterlands of the corporation. And so I would encourage you to continue the very good work which is reported in this scoping paper on the process side, on the growth side, and then supplement with measures on the state. And of course, that state thing can then be generalized to social sustainability, for instance, by simply measuring the distribution, the inequities in the system, and comparing them with a reasonable inequity. Thank you.
Thank you, Jürgen, for your effort to distinguish the process vis-à-vis the state, process being the green growth and the state being the green economy. And I will also invite Ziga and other discussants to respond if they would like to. Certainly the point is very well taken. And I think the first one is really about the decoupling, if you will, right? As you try to grow your economy and you try to reduce your impact. And I also believe that in our framework, the joint framework, I think there is a capture of the footprint concept or not. Yeah, it is embedded in the framework. Very good. Let me have one or two more interventions. You are allowed to formulate your questions in the meantime. Yes. Professor Yang. You have to say something, no? I woke you up. Would you like to maybe give us some words of wisdom, as always, on the work of indicators? Maybe you can get we can this time can get the microphone to you. No, we'll get the microphone to you. Huh? No. Yeah.
I was thinking of repeating what I picked up in Alice at the
Yeah.
conference, that indicators can be inspiring, can be inspirational, and it can trigger actions. It's very important.
Because that is actually a very important point to the technical people who are largely focused on defining indicators that are feasible to measure, you know, with a certain precision, and that can be compared across countries and over time. They often tend to forget the lack of inspirational value these indicators have for the general public. In my country, Norway, we have a wonderful, from a theoretical point of view, set of sustainable development indicators which the government is measuring and has been measuring for more than a decade. You know, publishing every year wonderful statistics which are totally unexciting, totally boring, has had absolutely no impact whatsoever on the political process in the country. And these are the typical, you know, capitals-based indicators, which says that so and so much of the value of the nation is in the heads of the people, and the rest is in the ground. This is wonderful from a theoretical point of view, from an economist point of view, but the experience is that this does not engage people. And so we need additional indicators that actually make people do something differently than they did it before.
Thank you, Jürgen, for putting the words into Professor Yang's mouth. But I have to verify with Professor Yang. Is that what you really wanted to say?
Let me add this one. This morning I remarked that we do not yet have appropriate indicators of green growth in Korea. On the other hand, Korea's Office of Statistics, or what they call Korea Statistics, has developed indicators, but that was intended. We have this national strategy which proposes 10 policy objectives followed by 50 specific policy tasks. Now, what they have done is to develop indicators of progress on each of those 50 policy tasks. The problem with those set of indicators is that you cannot use them for the purpose of international comparison. So I say that that's really not much useful. So I hope or wish that this indicators project that you're developing can be made available for wide use, including in Korea. And by the time we'll be able to know, we'll be able to say how advanced Korea is really in terms of achieving green growth.
Right. I think certainly this is very important. I think both Jürgen and Dr. Yang pointed out the importance of being able to really use the stuff we produce, right? And to be able to engage people, not to produce something that satisfies the curiosity of economists or statisticians, right? So that is a very important criteria, and we got to find a way of validate the usefulness, right, in practice, or the level of engagement that we are able to secure from the work of indicators. Very, very crucial points. Now
I'm fully awake.
thank you both. Let me now turn to Zig first, and then our discussants to respond to many of the excellent points that have been raised. And so let's start with Ziga, if you remember the questions that are pointed to you.
Thank you, Fulai. I think I have a list of 7 very constructive questions, so I'll try to be really brief. Actually, in fact, I would ask if it's possible to bring on one of my slides, because after the thank you, there is one slide that is very relevant to discuss the local dimension of the indicators. If that would be possible, I will just briefly touch upon that issue.
Can we reopen the
But in
slide?
the meantime, I can address some of the other questions as well.
try to
Yeah.
maybe try
So
to
first, let's go from the
condense
last, because
them,
this
yeah.
one is maybe the easiest but the most challenging, is the communication. We agree that is key, and we're working a lot on communicating better what we want to transmit. And one way to do this is either you go through dynamic internet widgets that show you, the dynamics of the whole process. The other thing is also developing iPhone applications that really track your carbon footprint, that track your the air pollution where you are now at, the water constraints, and so on. And we had some very interesting discussions also with the US EPA recently, that they have very advanced framework on that as well. So that would be one way to attract people, to really understand them, well, that's something for me inside. Then another thing would be that I would like to touch upon was on the corporate world. So we had, as part of the GGKP conference in April, one of the biggest topics was integrated reporting, or just measuring and reporting for green growth on the corporate side. And one of the messages that we learned from that is that there is also need from the corporate sector to cover the 3 pillars. But when you discuss with them, then you realize, well, we are talking about economic, environmental, and social pillar. Now, for economic pillar, we know something about how to measure it. We don't know everything. For environmental, we know a little bit less. On the social, there is very little information that we can use for. So that's why the first step is to focus on the 2 dimensions of green and growth, to really understand the interaction between these 2 themes, and then move further to the social pillar. And in the meantime, we tried as much as possible to bring in the specific social context of each and every country. And saying that is, we have done some work with the local dimension of indicators, and that I think is a very crucial aspect. And we had some very positive results from applying both in one OECD area, which is the Copenhagen area, and also in the OECD area of another country in the Latin America, which is in Chile, which you know that Chile is a very spread country, and it has a different sort of issues that emerge in different parts of the country. And there we found that it's very useful to speak in the concrete context, because Santiago has completely different issues than the south of the country. And there again, there are some specific issues there, like burning wet wood, for heating and so on, that maybe other countries do not face these problems. And you mentioned also one question that I found very interesting is how to work further on the policy indicators. That's one of the challenges that we are now facing with, and we have one project now in place. Ideally, we would like to bring forward that to the debate of really having a product market regulation type of indicators. But we are not there yet. We are developing that. But instead of that, we have done a lot of progress on different sides. So on environmental taxation, we have about 11 countries that are not OECD countries for which we have the information, which are Peru, Colombia, Guatemala, Uruguay, India, Argentina, China, South Africa, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, and Brazil. So there's already one start with that. And we could start with that because this is quite tangible and also gives you the headlines. Everybody talks about taxation nowadays. And the another project that is very valuable is project on the fossil fuel subsidies. And this is again a very big horizontal project with other international organizations involving not only the World Bank, but also the IMF and the IEA. So this is something that we also continue to work on. Then on the financing aspects that also relate to the policies, in fact, we have appreciated much of the work from UNEP-RISO Research Center, for example, on the CDM project, because that's a very valuable issue to discuss in the emerging or developing country context. And we have data on that, and we also report that. This is also one of the aspects. Then maybe just to give another one flavor is also on the ODA flows. Because ODA funding, so the development assistant, is a very important issue also to look into it. And there are also, it's related with the effectiveness of the funds and effectiveness of the funds for initiating infrastructure projects that relate also to involvement in natural resources. Then we have also work on the policy guidelines for the corporate sector. And also this would relate primarily to some extent it's related to green growth. It's actually the credit constraints. When you give the credits, so whether the companies fulfill certain environmental considerations or not when they launch a project in certain countries. And we have also part of the work that supports corporate sector with the guidelines. And this relates both for OECD and non-OECD countries. So this will be just a snapshot of the work that we're currently doing. But we really bring it to the heart, and that's why also we team up with other GGKP members, that the developing content is really important, because we need to look at the supply and demand side issues. So it doesn't happen all in the developed world. So I think that I have still one question to cover, which was on the substitutability and what is our further process on that. So this is a little bit technical. Perhaps this we could discuss a little bit more, but we have some work, because you know that if we would talk about the perfect markets, then prices could give us a lot of information already, but they don't. And it's also very questionable to what extent we can internalize environmental consideration into market prices. So on one side, we have a lot of work now going on the non-financial assets of the national accounts. And the other side, we have working streams on constructing shadow prices. And this is also very important, to really get what is the societal value of carbon, how to value the natural resources. So this is something that we are heavily engaged right now, and hopefully we will have some concrete deliverables by the end of this year, or perhaps early next year. So I hope that I covered most of the questions.
I think the issue of substitution is also maybe very relevant in the context of the SDG discussions. As you probably know, the UN, after Rio+20, has kicked off intergovernmental process on the negotiation of sustainable development goals. And in that context, the issue may be of thresholds, in particularly in major areas like climate, like oceans, like biodiversity, will be critical, I think. But of course, this setting of global thresholds can be very political as well, because there are implications for commitments. Now, let me invite Ivo Enda to please comment on some of the points that you feel are relevant to your particular situation. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think I started from the very back, because I like the idea that indicators is put as inspiring and trigger for action. And this is very important, because we don't want to have an indicators that limits or constrain people to do things, because even there are guidelines on doing green growth, but there are variety, and the variety is dictated with the situation of the country and the political process that agreed by everybody. And so those are the starting point that I wanted to make, because the other thing that so many institutions providing so many guidelines on green growth, green economy, sustainable development and all. And of course, then plus another thing is the international negotiation that's now it's. And so this confused people which wanted to start and wanted to use a certain guideline to move on. And so for Indonesia, luckily, I'm not really involved in the negotiation. Then once the president said 26% reduction, so we have a national strategy on that, and put at least then an output indicators. And now we have the question: okay, if some business have to reduce emission, for example, what is the impact on the income, the impact on the employment, the impact on poor people? So we are now is searching a way, tools to really do the calculation and prove that there are opportunity behind that. And there are, of course, then the transition point when you really slow down a little bit, like you drive your car and you're changing the gear if it's not automatic car, and then there is a little bit slow down. But the slowing down period, it depends on how you are making preparation for the next gear. So that's how we are trying to do. That's how I think Professor Jorgen is here, Professor Song is here also. It's good if let's just reconcile. You really stated the very important point, distinction between the state and the process, and that's not widely used by everybody, and that confused country who wanted to just start. So thank you very much for that. And I think if across this many international institutions and reconcile that, and looking at the report of the high-level panel on post-2015, they are starting with the very few still. Last time in the MDG goal number 7, we only have water, I think water and sanitation, and then forest cover. Now add some more, because those are the indicators is probably owned by across countries. 190 something countries already have that. Some countries have luxury to go beyond that, to go deeper on that. And that's the inspiration for a country who wanted to go deeper and improve the quality. So that's how Indonesia take indicators as that. That's why I make it as a guidelines. Even in the G20 development group where I involved in, now the use is toolkits. Let's provide a toolkits if somebody wanted to do something. Approach to that indicator as the light over there. How do we go about it? How do we start? Even how do we start? Sometimes, it's not. So indicators is important as inspiration. Second is, again, put capacity. Because capacity is different. When Indonesia wanted to start, when Malaysia, even though we are neighbor, probably different. Because we have to do assessment on that. Third is, I saw in the book, there are some composite indicators, and there are some index. I think we have to be careful. Indexing is probably important when we already able to produce output indicators and try to compare. But output indicators is very important because that will be used directly with what activities. And so that's more direct rather than, when you lump some variables together and become meaningless. Now, probably like the the Human Development Index. There is a education, health, and then economic. When a country, fall on that indicator, which aspect and which variable exactly. I mean, people have to go beyond that, and that's hard to really comprehend. And so, to a certain level is needed, but after the thing, it's already in place. That's why a localized system is very important. And I think the idea of global indicators is a conformity. Of course, then we are able to aggregate together, but it doesn't mean it's the aggregation that they are the same. Really, like it's orange here and orange there. It's hard to do that, and that's the experience also for MDG. And I think we really need to also work that in the sectoral indicators has to be established first to really have the green growth indicators with many components. And again, in my experience, that's why I like it when I saw the high-level panel that's already have broad indicators, even though it still have room for a country to really determine within that role. But I think start for simple is very important. I work with local government. The that indicators is good, but it's as good as if it can be implemented. In environment, measurement is very, very difficult. It's a lot of technical data. And so start from very simple is very, very good. And also, again, that can be easily get consensus on the application and put that capacity into institution that collect the data and then have a national system to collect systematically. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ibu, and for your words of wisdom. And certainly one of the many good points you have made is the importance perhaps for our future work on measurement and index to somehow be connected to the global process of the post-2015 agenda, SDG processes. There must be some sort of linkages there that we need to look at, right? Now, let me finally invite Dr. Khan to give us just a few final words of reflections,
Okay.
if you will.
Yeah, thank you, Fulai. I'd like to get a slide on the screen, please. I have a question to respond then. Actually, the current accounting system does not count on the items which has not any economic value. But what this slide shows what looks like the integrated economic and environmental system, accounting system. It composed of 3 layers. At the bottom layers, yellow and the red table shows the conventional economic activities, mainly based on the input-output tables and some input element, and allocation of input and distribution of product. This is the traditional economic concept of what is handled within the integrated system. At the base of this economic layer, we put the natural and environmental resources. We think that these natural and environmental assets provide some services in terms of flow as an input, as an environmental input, and also it affects the utility level of in consumption side. We call it the ecosystem services, amenity, and other criteria of the utility of the...
Maybe we don't have a lot of time to go into the details.
I see.
Sorry, because we are already a few minutes over.
Yeah. This slide is so much self-explanatory, so you can take a look at this one. And as to the depreciation and the waste materials, recycling, if we take these items in our system of accounting, we can put in the column of the input-output table as environmental sectors. It is not well identified at the moment in the systems. So this can be very useful to figure out what is the relation between materials and the environmental asset. And then next, I think that in our reasoning, there is a big vacancy of the work. This is how to put forward the system. Yeah, this is the socio-economic context of the green growth. You talk about the inclusive green growth. That I think that the final destination of the green growth effort is to how to build the humanity and planet responsible civilization in this world. So I think there are 2 efforts. The first one is the mission-driven effort in public as a public goals, and second one is the profit-driven effort. I think that we cannot put these 2 efforts in the same basket. So I'm focusing on the public effort driven by a mission, and I think that these need much work on in the GGKP partnership context. And I have one comment on the intervention of the Professor Jürgen. I agree with his view on the difference between green economy and green growth. I'm explaining the difference in green economy and green growth with a bicycle. There is a bicycle called sustainable development. It has 2 wheels. The rear wheels provide locomotive and momentum to proceed. It is called the green growth. It's a dynamic terms. But in the front wheel shows the direction and the state of our movement. I call it as a green economy. So in my view, green economy and green growth is 2 common but differentiated interpretations of the same word, sustainable development. That is my final comment on the current intervention. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. Of course, different people will have different ways of characterizing green economy and green growth. And my favorite one is that they are twin sisters with the same last name in Asian terms, with the same last name that is green, but different first name. They look alike, they look very similar, very pretty, but basically they are 2 different entities. That conforms to Professor Jorgen's point. They are different, but they share lots of common features. Anyway, thank you all very much once again, and thanks first of all to our chief presenter, as well as our discussants. Let's give them a round of applause.